Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Reds Rundown Podcast, hosted by two lifelong Reds fans and journalists. I'm Rob, he's Joe, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Joe, how goes it for you?
It's going well. I'm excited for some playoff baseball. We're recording in the middle of a day where we're going to have two games between the Braves and Mets to decide the last two teams in the National League postseason, and we'll figure that out here soon. I want the Reds to be back next year, but it's always fun to watch. And then football's in full swing, but we got some good Reds stuff to talk about here too.
Yeah, it's an interesting season to say the least, and we'll be spending most of our time doing that. We'll give a brief overview of the final week of baseball under Freddie Benavides, the interim manager. But we'll lead off here with the question of the day: Who was your Reds season MVP? We will get into that when we recap the year, talk about everything that happened. Joe, this week not much to say. The Reds went 1-4 over the week. They did finish officially above the Pirates with that last win, though. So that's good news. And they is this right? 77-85, right? Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure because I thought I'd seen something else, but my brain played a trick on me. The Reds finished 77-85. Sounds about right. 8 games under 500. And this is kind of where we thought they might be based on how things went for this season. September wasn't too bad for them, but it was still a rough year overall based on what our expectations were. But we helped the Guardians get 2 wins, and then did not have what I thought was going to be at least a little bit of a better series against the Cubs, Joe. But we did see Hunter Green make some starts to end this season. The hitting pretty much died as soon as David Bell left, and the pitching was okay through the back half of the season, or through the back last 5 games here. And there wasn't really anything major of note other than they won in extras. At least for me. Joe, did you have any other quick things here from those 5 games? We're not even going to recap them, like I said, because it's just no need to at this point, and we'll hop into the more important stuff.
Nah, it was a team that you could tell had a managerial change, had nothing to play for other than pride, and it showed up in the results, unfortunately, for the end of the season. But if we're going to save some wins, let's save them for next year when we actually have a chance to compete. At the end of the day, 77-85 isn't what we envisioned, but it's kind of close to the projections before the year. I know a lot of Reds fans were mad, but I think the Almanac had them at 81 wins, so 4 off. And it just kind of goes to show you, man, like that bad start to the season, that second month of the season where we really tanked, that kills teams. And if you had gone even closer to where they played the rest of the season, they probably are right there in the thick of the playoff race still, and maybe in this 162nd game right now. So every game matters. I know people don't want to say that with baseball, the 162, but you got to step up to the plate a little bit earlier next year for the Reds. But no, I think it was a disappointing season, but I'm excited that some changes are happening, even if they aren't all the ones that maybe we want, Rob.
Yeah, no doubt. And yeah, it's crazy to look back and say, things looked interesting to start off the season. You were already without Matt McLean. And then you start losing more players left and right. Noelvi Marte out for 80 games. Christian Encarnacion Strand gets hurt. Nick Lodolo gets hurt after coming back. And it just felt like, you never got Ian Jabot this season, which was pretty wild. They just didn't have half of really the players that we thought that they would throughout the majority of the season. It was still good. I mean, like players like, Tyler Stevenson, he had his first full season that I can remember without any injuries. He played a lot of games and played pretty well this year. Indy played well. We got a full season of Ellie to see his first development, which was really nice. So we'll go through here. I'm going to give some stats, Joe, and then we'll give our MVPs, and we'll talk a little bit about, I think, that injury bug. So let's start here with WAR. Leading the Reds in WAR, no surprise. Actually, kind of a bit of surprise was Hunter Green. Hunter Green with a 6.3 WAR, even after missing basically the entire month of September. This guy was unbelievable. We'll go through his stats here in a little bit, but was obviously the team MVP in terms of pitching. Elly De La Cruz played 160 games this year, Joe, for a 5.1 WAR. Nick Martinez with a 4.0 WAR, which I think was a little bit surprising for me. Andrew Abbott with a 3.3, and Tyler Stevenson with a 2.4. You know what? I'll read these next few just because they're interesting. Rhett Lauder in 6 games specifically with a 1.9 WAR. That is crazy. What a great way to start off his career. Buck Farmer with a 1.7, Indy with a 1.6, and Spencer Steer with a 1.5. The other ones of note in the opposite way, Noelvi Marte somehow finished even worse than Will Benson with a 1.8, Will Benson with a 1.4, Encarnacion Strand with a -1, the Mike Ford experiment with a 0.7, and Ahmed Rosario as well with a 0.6. The interesting one here, somehow Santiago Espinal finished with a -0.5, Joe. And then also Ty France with a -0.4. I'm a little confused on those ones, but is there anything in WAR at least that stood out to you that's worth mentioning or that you want to note?
Oh, just kind of what we were mentioning all season with this is just that we had, at least offensively, we had a star in Elly De La Cruz, 5.1 WAR. It was, higher at different points of the season, but overall, pretty good season for him. And then it was just a bunch of guys who were basically average. Like Tyler Stevenson's a pretty good catcher, but overall, you have guys who are sitting there at like 1 WAR, 1.5, 0.5. I'm with you on the Espinal thing. I'm with you on the Ty France thing. I don't really understand how that plays out, but that's where next year the team needs to get better. We need to have better support around Elly. That was seen with, Spencer Steer. We talked about how unlucky he was this year, but whatever luck he has to do to get back, he needs to hit for a better average. He needs to protect Elly De La Cruz next year, probably. I'd imagine that's how the lineup's going to go. And we need to get Matt McClain back and have maybe some signings of guys who will be not just average. Because wins above replacement player, I mean, if you're having negative WAR, that is, you should not be playing a lot for a Major League Baseball team. And we had a lot of guys who had negative. We had a lot of guys who were barely above replacement players. And just the way the algorithm works, that's just not good and not going to be good for your baseball team. So looking for this team to have young guys take step forwards next year, which we all want to see, and which is why David Bell got fired, according to Nick Kroll. And then also seeing if we sign anyone to kind of help that, because we're just not, you can't win things as a one-man team. And for certain stretches, felt like a one-man team, whether that was, Elly being Elly, or Jamer's big month a couple months ago, or Jonathan India's hot stretch, or Santiago Espinal. It seemed like a one or two-man team rather than a full team effort. And I think that does show itself in the WAR.
Yeah, and you can even see it in the stats. We'll go through here. Elly led the team with 618 at bats, almost 700 plate appearances, which is crazy. He scored 105 runs. He also led the team in hits with 160. Right behind him, if you want to say right behind him, was Jonathan India with 132, and then Steer with 129. Doubles were also led by Elly De La Cruz at 36, but Spencer Steer right behind him with 34. Elly also had 10 triples, thanks to the one he had in the very last game. He also led the team with 25 home runs. There were 3 players with 20 or more home runs. Elly with 25, Steer and Jamer, even though Jamer didn't play the last basically 2 months, with 20. Tyler Stevenson was right behind them with 19. RBIs were led by Spencer Steer with 92. He had that opportunity for 8 more, but he really struggled down the stretch. Stolen bases, obviously, Elly led the entire league with 67. The surprising second place was Spencer Steer with 25. Walks, Jonathan India with 80. Right behind him was Spencer Steer with 72, and then Elly with 69. Strikeouts, not even close. Elly led and hit the all-time Reds record with 218, which is incredible considering his on-base percentage was still 34%. Basically, almost every time he hit, he was getting on base, it felt like. Batting average-wise was led by Elly as well with a 259. Tyler Stevenson came all the way back, almost right behind him at 258. And then on base percentage, was led by Indy at 357, slugging Ellie 471, OPS was an 809 with Ellie. No surprises there. There were some interesting stats as well. I mean, Noelvi Marte ends with a 210 batting average. Not very good, Joe. And for the most part, this team kind of struggled to hit consistently. TJ Friedel came back and added a little bit, but could never really get rolling. Jake Fraley hit for next to no power whatsoever. He had one of the lower slugging percentages, at least in baseball, based on the amount of plate appearances that he had. The outfield in general seems like it's in a bit of a sticky situation as a lot of these players near 30 years old. What stood out to you most hitting wise, Joe, outside of Ellie, who we'll, I think, dive into separately a little bit later?
Yeah, again, I think all year long, I know we talked about this, but just I think it puts a nice bow on the season. We were a team that was built for average, but couldn't hit for average. And that was our biggest fault. Our biggest hot times were the ones we were hitting home runs. And some of these guys like Jamer went on a tear, or even Espinal with some of the home runs went on a tear. I mean, they're just not like traditional power hitters. I'm excited to see the growth of Ellie and maybe see him get to be like a 35 home run guy next season, maybe. I think that's probably reasonable to expect. But that to me was the biggest thing this whole year was there was a lot of strikeouts, which you don't want on a team who's not producing a lot of home runs. And there was not a lot of guys doing the little things to move runners over, to make contact, to do those things that, as much as I hate them, the St. Louis Cardinals have done for the first 20 years of the 21st century at the very least. The little things to win games. We didn't have that. So I do think some guys like TJ Friedel injured, all that stuff. But I do think next season, whoever the manager is, Rob, I think there's going to be a faster yank on some of these guys out of the starting lineup if they can't hit the ball. Because to me, that was the biggest thing that stood out is we're sitting here with guys who, like, Ellie has 218 strikeouts, only 25 home runs. Not saying he didn't have a great season. He had a great season. But that needs to change. We can't have just outs where they're striking out and no one getting on base and also no power, or at least sporadic power at the very least.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Joe, because I just wanted to check this. What do you think the average batting average was for this season? What? Sorry? You cut out.
For all baseball teams, right?
Yeah, for all baseball.
Yeah. I'll say 240.
You're pretty close. It was 243. So the Reds had, for reference, Tyler Stevenson, Ty France, Jonathan India, Ellie De La Cruz, Santiago Espinal, and Jake Fraley all hitting above that. Yet their team batting average was 231. So it goes to say that, now batting average has hovered between, like, in that range for years, Joe. But you don't want to be as far below that as the Reds were. The best batting average in baseball belonged to the Diamondbacks and Padres at 263. The Reds ended with a 231 batting average, which was fifth lowest, just above the Rays, Angels, Mariners, and that god-awful White Sox team. So not really a stat that you necessarily want to be below. It is interesting to note that baseball averages felt like they were generally down. They were, 5 points from the year before is actually pretty substantial when you think about the amount of at-bats there are, how many players there are. So, you could say that a lot of the Reds probably batted closer to the 260s, maybe 270s, but you don't really have that 300 guy, that major contact guy like you're saying, Joe. The closest one would have ended up being Jake Fraley, and they just ended up taking him out because his defense was pretty meh, and the man had no power left after his illness, which unfortunately sapped it pretty substantially, it felt like, as the season wore on. But we'll move on to the pitching, Joe, which was just up and down all year. But generally speaking, you had Hunter Green, Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo, Frankie Montas, Graham Ashcraft, Nick Martinez, Carson Spires, Jacob Junis by the end of the season, Rhett Lauder, Julian Aguiar, Brandon Williamson, Who else made starts here? Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I don't think I missed anybody. Apparently Tony Santillan, but I think he was just an opener. So those are all your different starting pitchers. And you just had a lot of injuries at unfortunate times. In terms of the rotation, Joe, Andrew Abbott ends up leading the team with 10 wins. Hunter Green right behind him. He also led the team with losses in 10. He's tied, actually. I'm sorry. Nick Martinez also had 10 wins. Best ERA goes to Hunter Green with a 2.75, which was pretty outstanding. Jacob Junis, once he got here and started pitching, did a great job at a 2.85. We have to note Rhett Lauder's 1.17 ERA, which is insane in 6 starts, to be completely honest with you. And they all did a pretty solid job. When you look at the big three, really Andrew Abbott and Lodolo, they had great moments. I mean, Lodolo was almost an all-star, and then once the wheels fell off for him, they fell off big time. And this is something that we'll have to kind of watch for moving forward with him. He was clearly the worst of the 3 starting pitchers, of our big 3, as we're liking to call them. Hunter Green did lead the team with 169 nice strikeouts. Andrew Abbott with giving up 25 home runs this season, which I believe was one of the highest in baseball as well. Hunter Green also led the team in walks, but was definitely a Cy Young candidate at the time. Moving to the bullpen, Alexis Diaz did get his ERA down to below a 4, Joe, which I am honestly shocked. But he had 28 saves. He didn't do terribly. He struck out just about a batter an inning, which is what we could have hoped for. Buck Farmer led the team in innings in terms of bullpen innings, 71 innings out of him this year, which is honestly pretty impressive. He had a 3.04 ERA, was easily the best bullpen pitcher this year. Sam Moll right behind him, and then Nick Martinez, obviously, as well. Brent Suter turning in a good year, too, worth noting. In 47 games, a 3.15 ERA in his first season back with his home team. So I will say this. For the most part, the bullpen wasn't bad. The problem was the use of the bullpen. Fernando Cruz just got the hell beat out of him, and he was just constantly in bad situations. Alexis Diaz, I feel like, had a good run, but with some bookend bad, moments without a doubt. And it's still, I don't know, it's just rough. You look at the stats, they don't feel that bad, and the team doesn't feel like they pitched all that poorly, but they still just weren't able to get it done for the most part this year, Joe. And I know the offense was really the big, crux here, but what stood out to you? Also, the fact that Justin Wilson got into 60 games this year, which is as many as Alexis Diaz with a 5.6 ERA. Between him, Emilio Pagan with a 4.5, if I would really prefer not to have to see these guys out of the bullpen again next year, but there's some creeping suspicion in me that the only one that'll for sure be gone there is Wilson. I think David Bell, for some reason, liked Justin Wilson a lot more than anybody else did. There was a reason why he was not pitching in baseball outside of just the injury. But we'll move on here, Joe. What stood out to you?
Yeah, really excited about this pitching staff moving forward, starting with the starters. I mean, now that Rhett Lauder came up and pitched well, you got 4. And whether they can stay healthy is the big thing. You have some depth in the organization to find a 5th. Ultimately, I think both Rob, you and me want to find a ace to go with this staff to help out, or to be someone at the top with Hunter Green there. But I was very impressed. I mentioned all year long, I like how different the starters were. Just staying healthy is going to be the key. For the bullpen, man, this was the greatest lesson of all time about bullpens in history. One year you can have a good bullpen. Next year you can run back the same players, and that can be awful. And then you can bring them back the next year, and they can be great again. It is a crapshoot in the bullpen every year. The usage didn't help them this year, but look at Buck Farmer. Buck Farmer, not that he pitched bad last year, but we talked about him being either the last guy in the bullpen when we previewed the season, or maybe being left out of the bullpen, and he ends up being the best pitcher out of the bullpen all year long. A guy who I think deserves a lot of credit this year. And then I think it does maybe make sense that for next year, some of these guys we can bring back some of these guys we can add more talent to, and this bullpen can be a very good bullpen next year with better usage and with some of the arms here. Some of the guys may be improving. Maybe some of these guys with different roles. Maybe Alexis Diaz isn't the closer because we can't trust him in high leverage situations. But maybe Fernando Cruz is gone. Maybe Justin Wilson is gone. We really improved those spots. I think that'd be really good for this team. I do think there's still some good bullpen pieces that we have. Yeah, obviously sign maybe two or three guys at the back end of the bullpen who can really be trusted. I think would be really big for this team. I'm excited to see who the manager is because I think that'll give us a good tell about how he's going to see things with this bullpen. I think you mentioned David Bell's attachment to Justin Wilson. I really do think he was just too addicted to the righty-lefty matchups, which fair, like that is a real thing. But at the same time, these days when you have to come in and face three hitters at a time, not the same as it used to be. And if the guy has a 5.5 ERA, like what are we doing out here? So, I think this is one where this season for the bullpen didn't go their way. Wasn't all their fault. Wasn't as bad as like fans usually make bullpens seem. But I'm excited for it next year. I'm excited for the starting pitching to start, and I think we can fill out the bullpen with some good guys. We'll have to see who we all bring back for next season.
Yeah, and we'll have to see kind of what. I mean, there's a lot of pieces up in the air for the bullpen specifically. Martinez, Suter, even Pagan are all up in the air. I will give Fernando Cruz his due. He did strike out 109 batters in 66 innings, which is pretty insane. To be completely honest with you guys, that is nearing the 2 batters per. He was striking out almost 15 batters per 9 innings, which is absolutely nutty. The problem was that when he wasn't striking out guys, they were finding bats and they were either hitting bombs or he was walking too many guys. Like, I'm going to hope that they can maybe flip him for anything at this point, whatever his value is. He is 34. I can't really see him being that great for much longer, but I want to give him his due and, give Alexis Diaz. I was pretty critical of Alexis Diaz at times, but he still showed up. Not the best that you would love, but a 4 ERA is not terrible. They were, and you got pieces like Sam Mole and stuff. Like, they've got pieces for sure, Joe, and we'll have to see where everybody slots in and what happens even with people like Graham Ashcraft. Where is he going to go next season? Brandon Williamson's, going to be out for pretty much the entire year next year. So they got to get some starting pitching depth outside of these young guys. You can't expect a guy like Julian Aguilar to come up here and just get his, rocks knocked the entire, season in case if somebody's hurt. So definitely some stuff here. And the team, they had moments for sure. Joe, who will give one pitching and one batting MVP, and I want it to be outside of Hunter Green and Ellie De La Cruz, because we know that those are clearly the 2 best. Who are your non-Ellie and non-Hunter Green MVPs? And we can switch off, or where are you at?
No, that's a good rule because I was going to go Hunter Green. I imagine you were going to either go Hunter Green or Ellie De La Cruz.
Yeah.
Especially with Hunter Green coming back to and still pitching very well. Very excited for next year.
Yeah.
In terms of pitching, I think it's pretty hard to do because there were so many injuries. Like at his peak, I really thought Nick Lodolo was really good this year, but then he has injuries and wears down. Andrew Abbott obviously got worn down again at the second half of the year, but still finished with like a 3.72 ERA. That's not bad for a guy who's like your 3rd or 4th starter.
No.
Looking at next year. Brett Lauder probably didn't play long enough to be the guy, so I'm going Nick Martinez, a guy who started off the year rough. For a pitcher, at least, we're going to go Nick Martinez. Started off the year rough. He was not what we thought he was going to be, but he did a really good job for us after he moved to the bullpen, and then when he went back to the starting rotation, he ate a lot of innings for this team as a lot of guys got injured. He did a lot of dirty work, finishes with a 3.1 ERA. I did not do the math on this, but if you did take out probably his 1st and 2nd month of the season, he probably finishes as one of the best pitchers in baseball, I mentioned with the ERA. Just crazy how much he came along. It remains to be seen if he'll be back with the club next year. I would love to have him for his versatility, probably in the bullpen role if we sign a starter, but I do think he is worth noting as the pitching MVP. And then if we're going to go with the hitting MVP or a fielder, MVP, I'm going to go a little bit out of left field here, Rob, because I do think This guy deserves a lot of praise, and especially the second half of the season, I enjoyed watching him. I'm going Santiago Espinal.
I knew
I loved him.
it.
I don't care about the war. I don't care about it. Like Tyler Stevenson, awesome to get back to where he was. I would have loved to see him play every day, or at least closer to every day that we talked about earlier this season. Jonathan India, way to kind of have a good year, bounce back year after a lot of talk about you getting traded. Spencer Steer, you were unlucky. I can't give you the award, even though I think you are still a good player. But let's go Espinal, like a guy we traded for that we thought would just kind of maybe spot start here and there, depth guy, but played multiple different positions for us. I thought was fantastic in the field. He did have a couple errors early, but I think he settled down and settled into a role and figured things out. I mentioned earlier in the year, did a lot of good things like hitting the ball to the right side of the field to move runners over. He bunted at times to get things going. Had that a power surge later in the year. Yeah, it's weird giving an MVP of a team to a guy with a negative WAR, but as we've said, Rob, I don't understand it. You don't understand it. I think that versatility and showing up every day and doing more than expected for this team, I think earns him that right. Now, if you said some of the other guys I mentioned, Rob, which I'm sure you're going to, I do not have anything against you. I guess my MVP here is the guy who did more than we ever expected him to do and did little things to help us win, even when we didn't win that many games, but even though it helped us out a little bit, I think that's worth noting. I'm hoping he is going to come back next year and have a role that is befitting of his performance this year if he continues to play well, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I am totally fine with that. Those are definitely. I don't think I would have gone Espinal. Nick Martinez was going to be mine, but I'll start a pitcher as well. I'm going to give one to the man from Cincinnati. I'm going to give it to Brent Suter because, look, there were times where he looked strange, and then like it looked like things weren't working. But outside of his injury, this man did whatever the Reds needed him to. They needed him to throw 3 or 4 innings. He came in and did it. They needed him to come in clutch situations to get outs, like in that Phillies series to start the year. He did that. Even in the first game of the season, he came in and shut it down, right? Like, this guy had 2 saves. He had 3 games started. He had a 3.15 ERA. He didn't really walk too many guys. He struck out a decent amount, nothing too crazy, but he did his job, and I want to give him a lot of credit for that because sometimes you come home and people actually don't play as well. They either get too excited or they let their emotions, I guess I would say, take the better of them. And it felt like whenever he came into a game, sure, he might give up a hit here or he might give up a walk there, but I really generally felt like I was pretty comfortable when Brent Suter was on the bump. So it's not to take anything away from like the Abbotts and the Lodolos. We just like didn't get to see him through most of the season. And I wanted to give it to Buck Farmer, but we already gave him his due. So I wanted to give a little bit of love to Brent Suter. I think he was much better than people realize. And I felt like he was extremely consistent this year, which is, I think, something that you need very badly. Oops, sorry. No, you go.
It's yeah, I don't maybe these aren't team MVPs for both the ones we
Yeah.
listed, but we did rule out Hunter Green, we did rule out Ellie De La Cruz, so it makes it tougher. But these, I think those are guys that did bet more than people think they did. Is probably a better way to phrase that. But
Yeah.
it shows you the real state of the Reds. If that's the guys we were excited about, me with a negative WAR, no matter how much I do love how he played, and you, Brent Suter, a guy who dealt with injuries and wasn't the best pitcher. He was good in spurts, like you mentioned, but that is why we need to have a better year next year because
Yep.
I hope that our guys next year are, hey, Spencer Steer batted for 275 and had 30 home runs, and that's our guy besides Ellie De La Cruz that is the best fielder. But, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I'll give my last one. I'm going to give it to Indy in terms of batting or fielder, mostly because this guy didn't even have a defined role. He re-signed with the team anyways, just because he loves being here so much. He's become clearly one of the vocal leaders. He played in 151 games when we were wondering how in the world he was going to get enough at-bats. He finishes third in at-bats behind your 2 cornerstone young guys in terms of Ellie and Spencer Steer. He had a really solid season. He changed the way that he played. His on-base percentage, like I said, was the highest on the team. He was getting on base almost 36% of the time. Look, guys, like that may not seem like much, but I mean, even Joey Votto in his insane seasons was kind of around that 37-38% range. So we saw a new eye out of Jonathan India that I can't say that I was expecting this year. His OPS was 750, which is pretty solid, to be honest with you. Anything above that generally is considered to be very good. So his defense was still a little bit lacking, but I think I'm giving these two guys credits based on the pressure that was put on them mentally and what they had to do. And what India has done, in my opinion, has shown that he's got about probably 3 good years of his full prime left, and the Reds need to take advantage of having him on this team in one way or another. I don't care where he plays. I think he'll be all right wherever. I don't know that he's necessarily a great guy that I would want to have in the outfield on a regular basis, but he's going to put in that effort. He's going to give you good at-bats. I loved his plate approach all season, Joe. I really did. I felt like he really took on that Joey Votto mantle. Like, just in terms of, he's never going to be Votto, but being able to watch pitches when he needed to, being able to be this guy that I think the Reds needed to rally around. And it was really satisfying to see that come to fruition with him. And I'll give the smallest shout out to Ty Steve as well. I think he's living up to his expectation. I think he's going to have a really good year next year. But those are my two. One technically, but you know.
Yeah, like the pick there. I would say too, Jonathan India. If you want to say MVP or whatever, MVP for just the locker room. He is a leader in the locker room now. He was young. He's learned over the last several years where when he came up, there were some talented players on the team he was able to learn from, some guys like Joey Votto and everything. And now he kind of learned on his own. He was the leader of this team. He was the one answering tough questions. The guy saying, "Hey, this team should make the playoffs." And you know what? Like, a leader sometimes sticks up for your clubhouse, and he did that as well. Like, he sat there and said, "Hey, front office, we're always right there, and it's just frustrating you never get us a guys at the deadline to go help win this thing." And whether the front office decides to take that advice and actually get better, I don't know. But he was critical of the front office and trying to hold them accountable. That is what a leader does.
Yep.
Some people would say it's not his place to do that, but I would say, hey, if he's been around this long, been around this club, and just knows the culture, knows exactly what's going on, and honestly is just as frustrated as us Reds fans that we haven't been able to do anything productive. So in a way that is even outside of just playing baseball, he has done a very good job of helping this team. And again, hopefully the front office takes his advice to heart this offseason. We have a lot of big decisions on different players we want to keep and even guys we need to sign as free agents.
Yeah, it's awesome. I would love to see them keep him just because of the fact that he is willing to be that vocal guy. We'll see what his position looks like in the future, but he's got prime years coming up. I wouldn't blame him for wanting to go for the money, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully the Reds will be willing to give him at least something that'll satisfy him. We're going to move on, Joe, to injuries. I want to just quickly talk about this because I'm going to list all the players that I can remember based on this list that I have here that were injured at one point or another, at least on the 10-day DL this year. TJ Friedel, Jake Fraley, Jamer Candelario, technically Noelvi Marte if you want to, Stu Fairchild, Nick Martini, Luke Maley, Christian Encarnacion Strand, still moving down here, Austin Wins technically if you want to count that. Let me see if I'm missing anybody else. Okay, we move on here. Hunter Green, Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo, Graham Ashcraft, Sam Mole, Brent Suter, Carson Spires, Emilio Pagan, Julian Aguiar, Brandon Williamson, Casey Legamina didn't. Ian Jabot, Alex Young, TJ Antone, and Lyon Richardson. Those are just the players from the Reds this season. If you don't even want to count Matt McLean, if you don't want to count, what's the other big shortstop prospect name that I'm forgetting right now?
Edwin Arroyo.
Thank you. Edwin Arroyo as well. I could see it in my head, but I couldn't say it. And then some other guys who just never made their way up here because they got injured down in AAA. I'm going to be honest. I think it's unacceptable. I think it is entirely unacceptable to have that many injuries on this team at one point or another. And I understand sports are the way that they are now. There are a lot more arm injuries, but it was the soft tissue stuff, man. It was the random strains, the broken hand of Encarnacion Strand that they said would take a couple weeks that took him out for the entire rest of the season. You know, it's just, it felt like it felt like the training staff just either was intentionally misleading us, or because, maybe they were trying to protect the players. I don't know what it was, Joe, but injuries not only derailed the season for the Reds, but I think that they really hurt the long-term prospects too, because this was the year that we were supposed to learn about a lot of guys. And in all reality, we really only learned about the starting pitchers, Ellie De La Cruz and Spencer Steer. That was it. And we were supposed to learn about Encarnacion Strand and Matt McClain and Noelvi Marte and all these other things. I know they couldn't control the Marte one. But regardless, all of these things that you can't entirely blame anybody for. Injuries do happen. But it just felt like our guys not only could not be injured, but they couldn't stay healthy. The fact that Lodolo and TJ Friedel went on the injured list multiple times this season, it's just unacceptable to me. And it's like they've got to find a way to keep their players healthier. They just have to. You cannot have this happen every single season. It can happen every so often, but it just feels like the last few years especially, we've had a real problem with keeping people healthy. And it's a lot of things that maybe are not necessarily 100% avoidable, but maybe with some, I don't know, better stretches or better care, that maybe some of it could have at least been slightly avoidable.
I'm a little bit different than you on this. I think this is just new age baseball. The Dodgers had a whole starting pitching rotations worth of people out. The Rangers had that at one point. I don't even know if we have the league average for number of injuries this year. We might be right around the league average. I think this is just something that happens to everyone, because how many times do we get to a series and we're like, man, it's lucky we're playing them at this time because they have this guy out, that guy out, and this other guy out. It happened probably about every week or every other week. So I will say this training staff that I have the problem with is more the accountability of it, more so of, hey, why are guys getting injured and then 2 weeks later we find out they need surgery? Or, hey, you said it wasn't that bad and then it's worse than we thought. So I will say the training staff needs to be better in that regard, but I kind of don't agree with this overall. And I do think this is just players getting injured. We can definitely improve training staff, don't get me wrong, but there are so many pitchers out right now in baseball that aren't going to be playing in the postseason too. There are so many guys that I think we missed large portions of the season. We definitely got hit decently hard by the injury bug, but I don't know, man. I think this is why you have to build your team for depth these days, because injuries are happening more. We're trying to get more power out of our hitters. We're trying to have them go harder in the weight room. We're trying to have the pitchers get more rotation on their pitches and just throw more gas. And what's that's going to do? It's going to throw your arms out. So as much as it sucks that we had injuries this year, I don't know, man. I want a better training staff just like everyone else, and I do want them to be more transparent with what's going on with our players, because that was a big issue. But I'm kind of preparing myself mentally to be like, this is almost the new norm with baseball, just with how many different teams just had so many injuries. And key positions, whatever, different position pitchers, outfield players, whatever it is, it just seems like it's happening over. And it made baseball as a product worse to watch this year. And I think did affect some of the stats too.
I mean, maybe I'm overreacting, but it just feels like it was horrible. It just feels like it was really bad. I understand, but the Dodgers have guys falling out of their whatever word you want to use. They were cutting people like Ahmed Rosario, who clearly didn't even want to be here, to be honest with you, once we got out of the playoff hunt. I don't blame him, but the guy was batting 300 and couldn't even keep it a spot on that team, because they just have so many players once everybody started getting healthier-ish. Again, I know the Braves also had their issues, obviously, with some very serious injuries as well. And I know a lot of teams did, but it just felt like maybe it was more just the key players to the Reds, or maybe it was more just because, for me, I will say I wanted to see the young guys take those next steps, Joe. And not getting to watch Marte, I know he got to play a lot of games, but I just feel like something fell off for him by not being able to start the season on the team. I think it affected his mental. We'll have to see what happens. I still think he's got a decent swing. I just think there's a lot of mental stuff for them. If he learns how to lay off any breaking pitch on the outside, I think his batting average is 20 points higher at least. To be completely honest with you, I really wanted to see what Encarnacion Strand would be. I wanted to see Matt McLean make, the next step. Would have been nice to have Edwin Arroyo around because I think, he would have gotten to come up and we maybe would have gotten to see a little bit of him. And then our big three starting pitchers all getting hurt at different points throughout the season. It just didn't feel good, Joe, is all I'm going to say. So maybe it's a bit of an overreaction, but if this is the case, then yeah, whoever the next manager is needs to have a very, come to Jesus moment or heart to heart talk, whatever you want to say with Nick Krall in the sense of, hey, we need to be like 8 starting pitchers deep. We need to have 3 or 4 guys down in AAA in the bullpen. And I'm going to need some guys who are better than Mike Ford to get excited about coming up early in the season down there in AAA. So I guess that's where I'm at with it, Joe. You got any other thoughts on that one before we move on?
Yeah, just for reference, and this will be a good segue because I know we're going to talk about this next in some form. The last time we played the Marlins, it was after the trade deadline. We mentioned that this was like,
They had no
a last stand for the Reds to try to make the playoffs. Yeah, they just traded guys off and they got new guys, so there wasn't that many people on the injury report. And maybe it was General Custer's last stand for the Reds because it ended up not being good. But
Yeah.
they had the full starting rotation down. It was this rotation that got them to so much promise last year that won Skip Schumacher the Manager of the Year award in the National League. Jesus Luzardo, Braxton Garrett, Ryan Weathers, Sixto Sanchez, Sandy Alcantara, Yuri Perez, all our starting pitchers. And I know we talked about the Cubs. I think the last time we played the Cubs, they had like 10 or so pitchers out. I think it's just the way that things are, and I think that's something we need to prep for. I think we tried to. Like, signing Nick Martinez did seem weird to, I think, maybe both of us, but at least to me, in the sense that we didn't need that starter. And, like, the relief role, like, sure is fine, but, like, we were just kind of like, oh, you probably don't need it. We have enough relief pitchers, and boy, were we wrong. But, like,
Yeah.
That was kind of the depth. He was the guy who could be that swing starter. He could be to go back to the bullpen. But I do think that's going to be an emphasis of people in the future of, hey, we're going to need at least 6, 7 arms who are ready to start games. And then, depth for the field, too. Like, and we get tested this year, but I know a lot of other teams, like you mentioned, the Braves are a team that started off the year at a faster pace than almost anyone in history. And now they're in the last game of the season. They just lost to the Mets in the first game of the 2 playoff. So they have to win this game to make the playoffs. And just been ravaged by injuries. I mean, Austin Riley, Ozzy Albiz got hurt for a while. Ronald Acuna. It's crazy. So yeah, so it's crazy all over, and that's what I think is kind of the prepping us for the next little bit of baseball is you better have guys ready to play. And I think we both thought we had depth this year, and man, were we wrong about that too? Like, we had depth at the start because we had 1 or 2 guys in every position I think they could fill in, but our AAA depth was pretty bad, and that came to fruition. So. Again, maybe we could have more transparency with the training staff because of those the very odd things that went on. But I'm wishing for better health next year, even though I think I'm preparing mentally for this to be the future of baseball, of having this many people hurt every year.
Sorry. No, it's going to be interesting, and I think, you're probably right. It just, I guess, maybe as well feels like the Reds, instead of the Braves, went out and tried to go get guys, like real guys, to fill their roster. And while I love Santiago Espinal and Ty France, I will say there were other options out there for sure that I think were available, and the Reds didn't do anything about it. And I think that's what Jonathan India is talking about. I mean, this team, realistically, if the big 3 starting pitchers stayed healthy, Joe, I think they would have been in it at this point in the season still. But the fact that they all got hurt right around the same time, I think just really killed them down the stretch here. So the one good thing I will say is it looks like we've got a really fun rotation moving forward. It does look like in some pretty key positions, shortstop and catcher, and I don't know, Spencer Steer somewhere, Jonathan India somewhere. They've got pieces and they've got good bench depth with people like Ty France, like Santiago Espinal, but they're going to have to figure out where else they're going to put everybody. We'll move on here, though, to managerial. Now, we talked a lot about the manager options last week, Joe. I just want to wrap up this season with something specifically. There were some notes. Skip Schumacher officially stepped away from the Marlins. They were going to do the same thing to him. Apparently, they said they weren't going to bring him back, but he officially, I guess, had the last laugh and said that he was leaving anyways. So I don't really know. Seems kind of, petty to me, but doesn't matter. He stepped away. He let them know that he wasn't even interested in returning anyways. And the Reds have apparently already been interested in him. I've also seen somewhere that the Reds have internally discussed David Ross, which is an option that we had talked about, and I think thankfully for both of us, I think it was Mark Sheldon who wrote this, that the only person that they're considering on the inside is Freddie Benavidez. So we're not going to have to worry about Barry Larkin, the manager, which he'd probably be at least a little bit better than he is as a commentator, but Freddie's the only one that's getting serious considerations. If it's anything based on what they did in these last 5 games, I don't know that Freddie's the guy, so we could probably cross him off that list. But I'm hearing, and I think it was Jeff Passan that put this out there, that Skip Schumacher, is going to be the option coming out into this offseason. And if the Reds already have that kind of interest, I'm very intrigued because if they're going to be willing to go after the top option, at least so far, does that mean that they're going to actually do something this offseason? Because if they're only going to go after the top option to kind of be the meh team that they've been recently, I don't really see the point. Why not try to, I guess, go get somebody else? I don't know. I mean, I want them to get the best option. You and I both didn't seem to think that Skip was the best option last week. But this is a very interesting development for me, Joe, to see how much interest apparently the Reds do have in Skip Schumacher, and they may even be talking to him literally today now that the season is over.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, he seemed to be the favorite going in. There's only 3 to 4 managerial opens right now. We'll see if anyone else gets fired in the next little bit here, but that would make it easier to go after the top option. It's not like there's a year where 7 or 8 guys replacing managers.
Sure.
If it becomes a bidding war, the Reds are out. That's just like their MO. They don't like to do that. I do think their familiarity with the ball club is good, but also I think if Skip Schumacher has options, I think he's going to go somewhere else because the Marlins and the Reds aren't the same team, but they are similar in the sense that they set him up for failure this year. Like, the starting pitchers got hurt, and no one can help that, right? Like, we all get that. There was no replacements, and they started losing games. Like, the fielders on the team, that was not an MLB lineup at the start of the year or any point. Then they trade away guys to the deadline where they were already tanking at that point. I think he had no chance, and I'm not sure he wants to go to a ball club where Jonathan India just talked about they never go out and get a guy. Like, yeah, they have talent, and they have more talent than the Marlins, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. Is like, if he really is the top of the market candidate, and other teams are actually interested, which maybe they're not. There's maybe like a lot of guys want to do in-house guys, and there's not that many jobs open. Does he want to come here? And that'll be something to consider because I would love to work with this young talent, but if he's going to end up being like on the chopping block after another 2 years because the front office doesn't give him enough tools to work with, then that's something to consider.
So what jobs are available right now? We know it's going to be us, the Marlins, and the White Sox. Who else is available right now? I don't really know that I've seen that yet. Because I know I know Baldelli's staying in Minnesota. Did the Angels job open up?
Not officially, I don't think. We have the Mariners, right? The Mariners replaced them. Well, yeah.
They kind of replaced
them. The Mariners have a Dan Wilson right now, but they obviously made a managerial change in the season, which means it's an interim manager. Yeah. I believe there's only 4. I think it's the White Sox, the Mariners, and the Reds, and then the Marlins. Schumacher said he was done after the season, which just ended. So, yeah.
So, I mean, I will say this. If I'm looking at it, I would say it goes Mariners, Reds, Marlins, White Sox in terms of jobs right now, right? Unless if you're really feeling like you're ready for a total revamp, like you're playing MLB The Show and you want absolutely nothing and you want to take the White Sox and make them good. I mean, seriously though, and I don't think it's very... I don't think the Mariners' job is that much better than the Reds. At least the Reds are centrally located, depending on where you want to live. You know, I don't know. Like right now, the Reds might be one of the top job openings. To be honest with you, maybe the Reds are actually picking a good season to get rid of David Bell. Maybe that has a slight reason to do it because think about it this way: if these are the only 4 jobs that are open right now, I don't know. Maybe the Nationals decide to get rid of somebody. The Giants did just get rid of their president of baseball operations and put in Buster Posey, so maybe they go for a managerial change. But for the most part, like the Rays apparently aren't changing anybody. The Twins aren't. The Rangers probably aren't. I don't know that the Blue Jays are going to as well. I don't know that anybody in our division's getting fired unless if the Cardinals decide to maybe. But it's interesting, Joe. It might be that we have one of the top jobs placements to go, and when you got Schumacher, you got Ross, and I would assume that Terry Francona. Everybody's talking that Terry Francona is a potential option for the Reds right now. I've seen it multiple places. It feels like a lot of people think that he's healthy enough to come back to baseball, and I don't think he wants to go to Seattle. This might be the spot that he would want to stay in Ohio. Like, I'm just saying, like, it feels like the Reds may actually have a pretty top job, and I hadn't really considered that until when I was making this, podcast spreadsheet or whatever you want, Google Doc. And I was a little surprised. I was like, okay, maybe they could actually get who they want, depending on what else is going to be available. I mean, the talent in Cincinnati is here right now. If this front office is promises to actually go out and do some stuff, and this may be a very attractive job for a manager. I'll put it that way.
I mean, it definitely could be. If I guess more to my point though, I think if Skip Schumacher really is the best guy on the market this year, he could always wait a year. He could wait until a better opening happens. He could wait and see if the team melts down in the playoffs and someone gets fired, like Aaron Boone. Even though Aaron Boone shouldn't be fired, that could happen. Being the second best option out of this list is not very impressive because I think the other 2 options, the bot below us, are the 2 worst in baseball. You do not want to go into the situations. To be honest, probably get fired in a couple of years, and that's probably not your fault. So yeah, there are some intriguing things about this job, but and I would love to say, hey, if Skip says no, he wants a different setting especially because he's just coming from getting screwed over in that regard. Yeah, maybe he's gone, but you still have, if David Ross, like, he got screwed over in a different sense. He got screwed over. They went out and found another manager while he was still the manager. He's not going to be. He might feel like, yes, I could do this in a small market. You guys will be loyal to me. I'll be loyal to you. You can have some young talent. That might be a better fit. I'm not saying Schumacher won't be a good fit, but maybe he doesn't want the job because of that. Or Terry Francona, who has had the year off and has played for the Reds in the past in 1988, and sees a young team with potential, much like he had in Boston. Maybe he is a better fit and says yes to the job while Skip Schumacher says no. I don't know. It's nice to have one of the top 2 jobs available right now. I expect more jobs to open. I mean, the season did just end for a lot of teams less than 24 hours ago. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think if I'm in a manager's shoes right now, I'm with you. It's Mariners, Reds, and however you want to rank the White Sox, probably Marlins and White Sox. If you're doing it honestly, but those 2 teams.
I want
again,
that pitching
probably
from
the worst.
Marlins.
Probably the worst 2 jobs in the sport right now, to be honest. And if I were in Skip Schumacher's shoes, like, I would definitely be asking the Reds front office some tough questions in that interview, of being like, hey, I just got screwed over with the front office not supporting me. What are you guys going to do to help me and want me to take this job? But I could just sit out for a year and then get a job like maybe the Angels becomes available again next year because Ron Washington's been there for 2 seasons at that point, and he's getting older and they haven't won anything, or maybe something else pops up. So yeah, definitely, like, there's a lot of potential here in Cincinnati, and there's a lot of players that I think a young guy, like a coach, can end up getting out of our young players. But that is also something to consider here is, I could see more jobs opening up due to the playoffs. I could see managers saying, I don't know if I want to go into the situation. Hopefully we make it a place where managers want to stay for a long time. I think we can in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be interesting. I would imagine we'll start to hear rumors here in the next week and a half to 2 weeks, to be honest with you. I think the Reds want to move quickly. I think they want to get their guy in place, and I think they want to start making things happen because the longer they wait, the less options that they're going to have. and less likely they are to find their guy. I think they still shouldn't rush the process, to be clear, Joe. But I think that they've been looking at this process for the better part of the last month, I would have to think. With the way that David Bell was let go, I can't imagine that they weren't at least looking at their options at the beginning of September once it was pretty clear that the Reds were not going to make it. So we'll see. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm giving Nick Kroll and company too much credit. I would like to think not. But we'll move on to our last bit here, Joe. Positions to target in the offseason. These are the ones I listed so far. I got corner outfield, back end of bullpen, starting pitcher, and then I put this very specific note. Just give me 2 stars, 2 good players, very good players, solid players, 1 bat and 1 arm, and I think this team can be that much better. That's all I'm asking for. And don't go and cheap out on a Mike Moustakas. Go and get... And I'm okay with them taking a chance like they did with like a Castellanos. I think that was what Candelario was supposed to be. That's clearly not worked out. Just go get me somebody good. Just a solid, consistent player. Somebody who can help out Ellie and somebody who can help out the rotation, because both of them need it, and I think it can be enough. The one rumor that we have heading into this already is apparently there's a rumor out there, and we'll see how serious. It's Bob Nightingale. It could be 50-50, Joe, with him, but the rumor that came out from him, he was also one who put out the Skip Schumacher rumor, is that the Reds plan to go after Sonny Gray very hard this offseason, because apparently the Cardinals are planning on trading Sonny Gray. I would like to remind everybody he is 34 years old. He is coming off of a solid season. A 1.9 ERA, or excuse me, a 1.9 WAR with a 3.84 ERA, 13 wins, 9 losses. They tried to, bring him back to Cincinnati after 3 very solid seasons here. Joe, I don't know. What do you think of this, and then what do you think of the positions overall for us to target?
Not a fan of bringing Sonny Gray back. First, it would take a trade with a rival. Don't like doing that necessarily, but
Yep.
Also just the age thing. If he was a free agent, we got him really cheap, sure, but having to give up assets to get him, I'm not really sure about. I would love to go, have that reunion, but he had his choice to come back. He chose to go to St. Louis, and I think at this point it's best for us to go look in a different direction. And like you said, Rob, I'm actually not too in terms of batters. I don't care what the positions are. I would like to get someone who can play first or third on a consistent basis. Again, Jamer, props to him for playing through that tendonitis. That had to be hell before they shut him down. May or may not be back, and had a negative WAR. Ty France, good sample size, good small sample for us. Don't know if he can be that guy for us every day. Christian Encarnacion Strand, we have no idea. So I don't care what it is. If you want to say, hey, let's give those guys a shot. Let's give Jamer a shot next year, or let's say Marte's our guy at third, or Espinal's our guy at third. I don't even know. I want 1 to 2, probably more like 2 solid bats. If they're outfielders, great. If they're first or third baseman, great. We've talked all year long about how Jonathan India can play the outfield, how Spencer Steer moved to the outfield, how all these guys can play multiple positions. There's a lot of talk about moving Ellie to the outfield right now. I know Marty Brenneman just did a podcast where he said that probably he would want to move them to the outfield too.
Ugh.
As much as I like defense, everything, I don't think it matters in a lot of people's minds. So just go get me 2 bats who can support this lineup, who day in and day out can do that. We will figure out the defense. We'll put someone DH if we have to. We'll figure that part out later. So that's what I want. Guys who can get on base. Guys like I mentioned last year, like JD Martinez, who I think ended up hitting 265, 270 with the Mets. Guys who can hit around that average, have some pop in their bat. That'd be awesome for us, especially in our ballpark. And then I want 1 starter. Top of the rotation starter, maybe not an ace, but right behind Hunter Green, like I mentioned, a guy who's going to be, if Abbott and Lodolo end up getting injured or wearing down, he's still there behind Hunter Green, so we have 2 solid pitchers. It allows Rhett Lauder to be in the number 5 starter coming into the year, less pressure. Other guys, like we mentioned, we're going to need pitching depth, as we talked about injuries before. Have those other guys be pitchers number 6 and 7 to start. Maybe start in the bullpen if it's Graham Ashcraft. Maybe he's your new swing guy. If you don't keep Nick Martinez, that'd be good. And then I want 2-3 guys in the back of the bullpen, guys who we can trust when the game is on the line. They can go with Alexis Diaz. They can go with the guys we already have, like Brent Suter and Buck Farmer, and all those guys we have to make decisions on for the next couple of years. I think if we do that, which is max of 6 or 7 signings, that is what a successful team could be, and one that could compete. Because Rob, I'm telling you, people don't like to do this because we have so many young stars. We have about starting next year, we have about a 2 or so year window where you
Mm-hmm.
better start competing, or else if you don't start competing, then you have to restart the clock and start trading things away. And we don't want to do that. Now, if you start competing, the window expands, right? It's just like when the Bengals had Joe Burrow on a rookie contract. They started the window when he was on his rookie contract. Now he's on a different contract. He played well enough that the window is extended. They have to do this in the next 2 3 years. They have to compete on a large scale. They have to go to the NLCS. If they don't do that, you start getting into guys who will be going to the latter end of their club control. It'll be guys who we'll have to give more money to, and honestly, we'll have to give contract extensions too much, like we talked about the Braves did a couple of years ago to get their stars to stay. And we have not done those deals yet. We still don't have Ellie signed. So I really think there is a huge importance on these next 2 years. Probably more important than we've seen in a long, long time, just given the number of young guys. So 5 or 6 signings now. Doesn't have to be for star money, but guys who can be solid guys like behind Ellie in this lineup, guys who can be one starter and then 2 bullpen guys. That is so imperative. And again, positions I don't care on the field, but I do want one starter and 2 relievers at the very least.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, I'm looking at the MLB free agents according to Spot Track right now. There are a lot more options currently for starting pitcher. I'm gonna give you a couple names here, real quick. We got Blake Snell, Robbie Ray, Giolito if they want to take a chance on him again. Corbin Burns, Max Fried, Jack Flaherty, Sean Manaea, Shane Bieber. There was one more who I thought I saw down here. Walker Bueller. Those are, I think, the names that I would be most interested in, if I'm being honest with you. Maybe not Shane Bieber as much. I heard his arm was kind of ailing here, but the rest of those guys would be very interesting to me. And I think that they can go out and get one of those guys, to be honest with you, Joe. I know Walker Bueller's been a bit of a mess in terms of injury, but I'd be totally fine if they went out and grabbed him. And if they don't want to go get him, go get me a freaking Jack Flaherty or a Max Fried. Corbin Burns is probably going to be the top option. I don't think he'll be available. I don't know if Blake Snell is actually going to end up opting out of his player option here, but like there are guys who are potentially available if they opt out or anything like that I like. And then I will say batter wise, not as many as I would have liked. I mean, obviously I would love for them to joke around and go get Juan Soto for whatever money he wants. He is already friends with Ellie De La Cruz, so make him the $600 million man or whatever it is. But I don't think the Reds will ever have that kind of money. But there are still some interesting options. Teoscar Hernandez, if they wanted to. He had an okay season for the Dodgers. You got Pete Alonso, Alex Bregman. Bregman honestly interests me the most right now. You got Michael Conforto, Reese Hoskins, Mitch Haniger, Gleyber Torres, although I don't really prefer Gleyber Torres. JD Martinez is going to be available again. Willie Adames. Eugenio Suarez, Joe? Eugenio Suarez for anybody? Had a solid season this year. I know he's a little on the older side, but I don't know. It could be fun. Eloy Jimenez is going to be available this year. He could be somebody of interest. Tyler O'Neill, I know, somebody that a lot of people have us going after as well. Those are kind of the big ones that I could find that I think are actually of interest. I guess they could look at. I know this would make you throw up in your mouth a little bit, but they could look at a reunion with Jesse Winker. I don't know that he'd necessarily be the bat that they want, but he could be a guy who could fill in based on the way that he hit this past year if they felt like he could do it again. But those are the kinds of guys that are going to be available, Joe. Who stands out to you amongst all of those batters and starting pitchers that I just threw out there at you?
There's almost too many to name. I'm just happy that there are so many names, honestly. Blake Snell's the guy I saw throw the no-hitter this year, so would love to see him come in. I don't know if they go for another lefty in their rotation. Having 3 would be pretty heavy. It's been done before,
Yeah.
but they probably end up going with maybe a righty. Corbin Burns is obviously, like you said, the guy that could get the most money maybe out of this. I could see them going for him, at least in theory, and then never actually getting to the point where they agree to a contract with him. But any of those guys, any of those top pitchers you mentioned are fine with me. Hitters, you mentioned Jesse Winker. I mean, he was 243 hitter for the Mets. Once he went over there, he really helped them get to the point where they are now in the playoffs officially because they won that first game with the Mets or with the Braves. So the problem would be like we have a bunch of guys in the last couple of years that we've platooned and they just like haven't gotten enough playing time I think to really get into a rhythm or just haven't really worked out this year with Jake Fraley and Will Benson. So that would be another thing. Are we going to platoon him? Is he going to get enough at bats to feel good and to keep the playable going? Obviously, we want the top free agents possible. If we're doing MLB the show, we want Juan Soto and all that, but that is not likely. It might be you have to take for the Reds. You might have to take a chance on JD Martinez or someone like that, who again mostly a DH at this point in his career. But what did we have a DH this year, Rob? We didn't have much production out of the DH spot because we are mostly just throwing guys just who needed who needed a spot to get more bats. So it wasn't like we had a real DH on this team. So. Any of those guys really sound good. I'm excited to see who they might sign and see if they do any. I think the big thing here, Rob, is I mentioned they could go first or third baseman just based on what's happening with the positions this year. But what money do we end up? Do we end up trading Jamer? Do we end up cutting Jamer? Is it just, hey, he really had bad knee tendonitis and we're going to blame it on that? That's fine. Like whatever you want to do is fine, but the production next year has to be better. And if you don't get 1 to 2 batters out of that list. It's likely going to take a lot of big years from guys who did not have big years this year, which is not a great feeling for Reds fans and a good expectation for a front office, I feel like.
I feel like they're going to have to go trade for a batter, if I'm going to be honest with you. Where I could see them spending is pitching. The guy I'm looking at right now is Jack Flaherty. If the Dodgers decide that they don't want to just absolutely ball out and pay for him a ton, I would be intrigued by him. He's another righty who he had an not great 2023, but and 2020, but that was on shorter amounts of games, obviously. But in general, he's been a guy who's had like a sub-4 ERA. He strikes out, over 10 a game. He's right around Hunter Green's level in terms of strikeouts. Like, I think if you want another righty, he would be an interesting one for me. And then in terms of a bat, I mean, honestly, like, might be Pete Alonso for me. That would be the most interesting just because I think he'd give you a true power bat. He doesn't help you much with your average. So the other guy you'd have to go out and get is somebody who is going to help you batting average wise. But I mean, dude, if this is his worst season with 34 home runs, unless if he hit one in these last 2 games, I should say, can you imagine how many home runs he'd hit here in Great American Ballpark? Like, he had 53 that first season. I could fully see him doing that. And he is one of those guys that is mostly going to hit home runs, to be clear. He is going to strike out a lot. Not as much, actually, as you would think, even, to be honest with you. But he's been an all-star every season. If the Mets really don't want him, if I'm the Reds, I'm going after him big time, to be honest with you. I know this is the type of guy we want Encarnacion Strand to turn into. And there's a world where he potentially could be that when he's healthy, but you probably could sign him. You said we have that, 2 to 4 year window. You could sign him, and honestly, like, you'd be set at first base and DH. You could probably even still sign him and keep Encarnacion Strand. You could probably just drop Jamer, sign Pete Alonso, and keep Encarnacion Strand and still develop him and let him watch one of the best power bats in baseball for the next 3 to 4 years. He's still young enough to where he'd only be, 26, I think, by the time that this contract would be over and he'd be heading into his prime. So, I don't know. That's just the option that I look at the most. I would love to see that in Cincinnati, and I'd still love for them to go out and get somebody else. But if they're going to go get a corner guy, either him or Bregman interests me the most right now.
Yeah, that's not a bad call whatsoever. If you did go after those guys, I'd be excited. It has some name recognition for the fans. It would help get people in the seats after a lot of maybe faith had been lost maybe this season, and the power. It would be nice to have Pete Alonso, a guy that for sure could hit 30 home runs next year. Like, as long as he doesn't get hurt, he's going to hit 30, 40, 50 home runs. Something we don't have. We have, like I said, a bunch of guys who are trying to hit for power who are not built to do so, and that would be checking off a box that we need is some power too. So I'd be okay with those guys. And like I said, I don't think they're going to be getting in the bidding wars for those guys just because of what it would cost, but we can still dream. It's still early in the offseason before our hopes get smashed, Rob.
All right, let's make one quick prediction before we hop off here, Joe. Who do you realistically think, one pitcher and one hitter, that you think the Reds will realistically have a chance with?
I'm actually gonna go with Jesse Winker as the hitter because the Reds love to do this where they have guys who leave and they end up bringing them back. Like they end up being good and they try to bring them back later in their careers. Um, and I do think that he's a good hitter. Whatever the rumors were when he left about not being a hard worker and everything, maybe he's figured it out at this point. Now I don't think he's going to be a key, but if we're talking about realistic, I need to see the Reds actually do something with the money rather than getting like, we talked about this year, the big two guys were Frankie, who was coming off injuries for the last several years, and Jamer, who like projected to be better than he was. Don't get me wrong, but I would say Jesse might be that guy. Like I think they might try to do that because he still has some pop in his bat. He's a guy who can hit for average, and I think he loves it in this ballpark because as soon as he left, it went downhill. So I think he could be a guy. And then I will say, I liked what you said with Jack Flaherty. It's going to be someone from that tier. I don't know who it's going to end up being. It's not going to be. I don't think they're going to end up getting Corbin Burns. I don't think they're going to end up getting Blake Snell. Um, Bieber might be the one just because I think his value's been hurt a little bit this year. So I'm going to say Bieber. I think Bieber, though, guys pitched in Ohio, probably can afford like not like a star money, but pretty good money they're going to have to pay him. They've shown that they can get to that B or C level free agent money. So I think it's going to be guys like that. Unfortunately, is what they do now. What we want is probably higher than that. Like you said, these are realistic picks for who we could sign. I think that's might be what you're looking for, or what they're going to try to do.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I'm going to bring a guy out who I didn't say, but man, I know they don't love to get older guys, but I could totally see them going out and getting Christian Walker. That's a guy who I could totally see them signing. He batted 251 this year, 26 home runs, 84 RBI. He can play outfield. He can play first base. I can totally see them. He did have a 2.6 WAR, so maybe a little bit better than I'm giving him credit for, but I think he's been kind of pushed out a little bit there in Arizona, so I could totally see them going for him. He's one of the big ones. I'll throw out one other name that I didn't put out there that I think, let me make sure that this is the same person I am thinking of. Another interesting one I could see them going after is Anthony Santander as well. I think he's going to be pretty valuable. I think a lot of people are going to want him as well, but I think there's a chance he slips through the cracks because his batting average is pretty meh, but he did hit 44 home runs this year, so there's a world where if he slips through the cracks and is like one of those Matt Chapman type guys who for some reason just doesn't really get paid, I could see the Reds maybe taking a chance on him. Pitching wise, I'm still going to just look at starting pitchers. I feel, you know what? I'm going to throw out one that's maybe a little bit less than, and not even a guy who I mentioned, but I'm going to say Luis Severino is maybe a name that they could go after. Former ace for the Yankees, has dealt with injuries, but when he's healthy, he has been very good. 2023 was really his only bad season. Otherwise, he's had basically all-star performances, and he has really revived himself with the Mets. It may be too much. He may be somebody who a lot of people are going after, but he's still only 30 years old. He's been pitching since he was 21. He's learned a lot. I think he's a better version of Frankie Montas, to be honest with you, Joe. He's definitely a more healthy one. And, he's played his entire career in New York. Maybe he'll be looking to, go to a place with a little bit less lights. But regardless, he had a pretty solid season this year. His strikeout numbers aren't as big, but he's learning how to pitch instead of just be a thrower like he was earlier in his career. I could totally see the Reds making a run at him.
Those aren't bad options. It sounds like to me, Severino, if he's a guy we get, I would think that's more of a Derek Johnson signing, as like he has had a good year, but it's more of like I wouldn't say reclamation project because he's done better than that this season. But it's like one of those you want him to find his best stuff again. And Derek Johnson is perfect for that. We talked about pitching coach maybe coming back. So that would be my only note is if Derek Johnson's not here, maybe he's not a guy we go after. But if he is, that could be one where he ends up having a 3.5 ERA and having a really good season, one of his best in the last several years. So
Oh, you know who I did not mention, who I absolutely should have mentioned, Joe? And I'll just say this for the fans out there. Michael Lorenzen, actually. They totally would go. He's not going to be nearly as expensive. He's done a good job, and I don't think he'd hate at all coming back here. I mean, I was at the game when he pitched, and he got a standing ovation coming back. They even thanked Michael Lorenzen on the big board. So him or, even a Spencer Turnbull, there are going to be some decent starting pitchers out there this year. If they think that, he's got it left, or a Freddie Peralta, there are actually some, I mean, John Means even, Clevenger, like, I'm surprised actually, Joe. There are a lot of decent starting pitchers who are going to be available this year. Some of the guys I know I mentioned are on options, but it seems like they'll likely opt out. Even Michael Wacha, who's had a pretty solid season, like, there are starting pitching options that they can get that are not Frankie Montas. I'll put it that way. And he's actually had a decent season with Milwaukee since he left.
he has, and it's a good thing to note too that starting pitching prices, you can probably get starting pitchers in trades more easily in the offseason. We had a lot of guys who either missed the whole season, like even Shohei Ohtani is going to take a spot in that Dodgers rotation everyone expects next year. I mean, maybe they come out and say he's not pitching anymore, but there's a lot of guys who missed this full season who will be either getting healthy this spring or something that will make a lot of less open rotation spots for a lot of teams, or they'll be looking to trade some of these starting pitchers. So I would kind of look out for maybe trading for I don't know if they have the ammo to go get a true ace, but if you're going to try to get like a second or third pitcher in a rotation, it could be the year to do that. Like we mentioned how the Marlins had their whole pitching staff hurt. The Dodgers at different points. The Rangers had two full pitching staffs worth of good pitchers.
Yeah.
And like those guys, they had guys who were a seventh or eighth on their pitching list, on the starting rotation, who could be second or third starters in other places, but they were signing for the money, and now that space isn't available. So just like we got Rosario this year, it might be interesting to check that out in the offseason where we could trade some prospects or even some position players. Like maybe it's even Jamer, or some team wants an extra bat like his off the bench for even a contender. I could see Jamer being a valuable piece for a contender if he's not playing every day. Maybe they trade us one of their 7 or 8 or 9 starters, Rob. So there's a lot to be said still. Obviously, a lot of that will happen in the winter meetings in December, but it's good to know that going in that maybe it's not going to be a free agent signing. It could be a trade. And the thing that I think the market that I've seen for me personally that I think will be easier to get in the trade will just be the starting pitching, because there will be teams that have too many of them.
Yeah, I'm really interested. We do apologize we went a little bit over, but this is the last episode of the regular season. Had a lot more to talk about, I think, than normal, especially with some of the news that has come out recently. But there's no doubt the Reds, it seems to me that the Reds are more inclined to make moves this year. How many of those are going to be real moves? How many of those are going to be let's take chances and hope we can reclaim guys? What all that, I think it's going to depend on the manager. I will tell you this much. If they, for some reason, go and get Freddie Benavides as their manager for next year, I may literally just be crying on this podcast the day that it happens. Again, Freddie seems like a great guy, but I do not think that is going to change the Reds' fate. So as long as they get somebody who is not him at this point on the list of people that has been or have been mentioned so far, I will at least try to find a way to spin it in my mind and make it a happier thing. But with that, we're going to sign off here. Joe, you got any words of wisdom before we leave?
Yeah, 3 little fun facts that I find interesting. We're going to be seeing Reds jerseys back in the All-Star game. They will be announced today. They're going back to the classic. Every team wears their own jerseys. I love that because you can see which guys are actually on which team. And it's really cool to see, the home and away jerseys and everything. So that's cool. The second one, Tyler Stevenson and Ellie De La Cruz eligible for the All-MLB team. Yep. We'll see if they actually get in. That's what they're pushing right now is Ellie and Tyler Stevenson. And then number 3, things that Reds fans can look out for if they I'm sure they'll be watching the playoff baseball, seeing possible future Reds and some of these playoff teams. But the Arizona Fall League is starting. Now, you don't get to send a full team. We'll have 8 guys represented on the Glendale Desert Dogs. And I was interested in 3 specifically, Rob. I think Edwin Arroyo is playing in this. Great. So that'll be good to see him coming back from we'll have Connor Phillips, who we mentioned several times had a rough year. rough year. So let's see if he can get back on track. It seemed like he came back from they shut him down for a bit. He came back and did a little bit better for a little bit. So I don't know how that really ended. And then Christian Encarnacion Strand. We need to see what we're getting out of these guys, specifically Arroyo and Encarnacion Strand. Phillips is just a flyer at this point, but those are 3 of our 8 guys, and the league's going to start, I think, October 7th and go through November. So if you're looking for guys to kind of see, like, hey, maybe we can actually count on CES next year, this would be the time for him to prove it to us.
That's a huge nugget there at the end. That'll be really interesting because those are 3 guys who will absolutely influence this team going forward next year, and some of the decisions that they're going to make, I think, heading into next year as well. Maybe not Connor Phillips as much, but the 2 batters for sure. They will be looking at contract lengths with their development in mind. But with that, yeah, we're going to sign off here. We don't know. Joe and I have not discussed if we're going to continue doing this weekly in the offseason yet. But we will have more Reds rundown at some points during the offseason. Maybe even just quick check-ins once the Reds have some news potentially for us to discuss. But we appreciate all of you who have been here with us from the start. It's been a fun season for sure. Joe, I'll be honest, I didn't know if we were going to make it the full season, but we did. We did. So I'm proud of us, happy for us. I appreciate Joe doing this because I really wanted to. And it's been really fun to talk every Monday, the same way that Joe and I basically did anyways before we started the show. So, Joe, I'm going to sign us out here. So we appreciate all of you who've been watching. And with that, guys, we will catch you on the next one.